Hello and welcome to FinextraTV. I'm Liam Xavier and you join us here at EBAday 2026 in Copenhagen. With me right now is Jonathan Cardwell, the Business Development Lead at Banfico. We're going to be talking a little bit about APP fraud and verification. Lovely to have you here.
Thanks for having me, really appreciate it.
So I mentioned there about fraud. It's a global problem that continues to rise despite the fact that there are a lot of verification tools out there. How can we make sure that these verification methods and tools are actually working to combat the scope of the issue?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, one of the key things is that verification is fundamentally a prepayment check, right? It's not like the other kind of fraud tools on the market that have traditionally been very, very good at looking at things like customer behavior, right? So it'll look at the type of device you're using, the velocity at which you use that device, how quickly you make payments, your transaction history, and it kind of builds up a complete set of these data points to build up a complete picture, which is great. But the interesting thing about APP fraud and the slightly different thing, or authorized push payment fraud, more often than not, it's the customer themselves who have actually logged on to the device and they're actually authorizing the payment, right? So it's fundamentally different, and that's where I would say verification comes in, right? So if you're essentially allowing PSPs to add that moment of friction just at the right time, which is just before the payment happens, that's fundamentally how verification works. Naturally, you don't want to add too much friction, right? So if there's kind of a verification result and you get a match, the payment goes through as usual, no kind of difference there. The key is if there's a close match or a no match, it's at that moment then the PSPs can kind of, start to warn the customer, start to warn the payer that they might be a victim of fraud. It might be a fraudulent payment. They can, add in more controls, or they can even send the payment off for kind of further review. So that's kind of the key point. I think fundamentally when you're applying verification, you kind of want to do it on a risk-based approach. So again, you don't want to add too much friction to payments where you don't need to add friction. But, corporate bulk payments, high-value payments, cross-border payments, all of these payments are fairly high risk when it comes to kind of the overall scheme of things. So that's kind of the very, very good use case for verification of pay, for kind of, the fraud tools that we offer and we use. I think, fundamentally, will verification completely get rid of APP fraud? The reality is no, right? You have to have a multi-layered approach. It's one of many tools that need to be used throughout kind of the payment journey. So it's not a silver bullet. Having said that, I do think it's a very good step towards kind of bridging that critical gap between what I would say is fraud detection and then fraud prevention. So,
one of the industry things that seems to be getting better is being clearer when it comes to regulation, clearer when it comes to frameworks. And we've got more clarification coming for the VOP rulebook. That coming into play in the 20th of September, I believe it is. How can we make sure that these are a smooth implementation across the board?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think naturally the changes that are coming in September are moving us towards kind of smoother implementations. I think overall it's a good thing. Fundamentally those changes that are coming in the rulebook are born from the lessons learned from the implementation of last year. 3,000 plus PSPs, 40, 50, 60 RVMs or technical service providers all providing verification of pay, including us. So some of the changes we've suggested I think should be included in the September rulebook. So it's really from experience, you grow and learn on this sort of stuff. I think one of the things to remember is verification of pay wasn't just a sort of regulatory obligation. It was essentially a massive interoperability exercise, right? So I think it was the first time across Europe, pretty much, you had 3,500 PSPs all connecting to a single scheme, all using the same kind of scheme, API communication. Everyone has to be online 24/7. Everyone has to respond within, 1 or 2 seconds, so pretty much real time. That's a huge technical challenge. But if we're kind of looking forward to making sure there's a really clean implementation over the next couple of years and beyond, I actually think most of the challenges are going to be operational rather than the kind of technical or the theoretical side of things. So, as a PSP, you have to ask yourself, am I storing trade names for my corporate customers? If I am, am I using them in verification of payee? Does my name matching algorithm handle the different languages across Europe? Does it handle the different diacritics? Am I ready to onboard the 7 new non-Eurozone countries that are being onboarded by next year? You know, all of these are questions, but they're not just kind of tiny technical questions. They're fundamental to how verification of payee works. And it's fundamental to the operation of verification of payee. You know, if you have per data or per data set, you're going to have a per service, and ultimately it's customers at the end of the day that use the service and use the communication from PSPs to make decisions. So if you have a per quality service, the trust from customers in the PSPs in the industry is naturally going to go down, which none of us want, right? I think the plug Banfico here for a second, I think this is where we really do our kind of value add, right? We connect you to the schemes, we take care of the name matching algorithms, we onboard the new PSPs, we handle the transactions, the auditability, the compliance. So we're not kind of just a vendor that gives an API and says, you know, done, connect. We kind of go one step further, and I would say we almost operationalize VOP for our PSPs live and in production.
And if we're thinking about address verification systems, how are these particular areas evolving to combat APP fraud?
Yeah, so I think verification systems in general are kind of evolving and they're moving. I think, you know, the fundamental thing is that we're learning more and more about APP fraud, especially over the past couple of years. So we now understand that APP fraud isn't so much a authorization problem, it's a social engineering problem, right? Again, APP fraud is very much when the payer or even the victim of fraud is authorizing the payment themselves. And a lot of the tools on the market have traditionally looked at, or a lot of the controls put in have been very technical, so they're kind of looking at the IBAN, is it structurally sound, and then the payment kind of goes through, but that doesn't really do anything for APP fraud. You kind of mentioned regulators beforehand as well, and I think if we're going to be talking about kind of industry collaboration, I think regulators have naturally got a huge part to play as well, right? So, you know, you have the rollout of confirmation of payee in the UK, you have the reimbursement scheme in the UK, which for all intents and purposes for this conversation, if you're a victim of APP fraud in the UK, you're probably going to get reimbursed that fraudulent amount by the banks. You have verification of payee across Europe. You have further legislation, the PSD3 PSR, which is kind of expanding the verification of payee service. And then you have regional services like the Bank of France kind of fraud sharing database initiative, right? So all of these things come into play. It needs to be a regulator approach, but it needs to be a kind of community-driven approach as well. And I think, you know, if you look at APP statistics, especially across the UK and Europe, they're kind of telling a very clear story. So, you know, last year, 550 million lost to APP fraud in the UK. Europe, it was 4.2 billion across all fraud, but then 2.5 billion of that was credit transfer fraud, right? So those numbers are, I think that was an 18 to 20% increase from the year before. So it's very clear the fraudsters are now going towards payment types and fraud types where they're convincing the payer or the victim to actually authorize the payment itself. So it's much different from kind of that credit card fraud where you have stolen details, stolen bank details, and then it's someone without your knowing kind of making that credit transfer itself. So yeah, specifically on the tools themselves, as I kind of said, a lot of the controls previously were all around, is an IBAN structurally sound, is an account number valid, is a sort code number valid. Now we're really looking at, you know, do we know the ultimate beneficiary of this account? Ultimately, before someone goes to pay into this account, are they confident that they're paying the correct person, right? That they're the actual owner of the account? Again, not to plug Banfico too much, but I think, again, this is where kind of our service and others come into play, right? If you connect into our service, we'll connect you into confirmation of payee in the UK. We'll connect you to verification of payee in Europe, the Bank of France fraud sharing scheme, but then we kind of go above that, right? So additional data points, ID fields, LEI codes, and then cross-border as well, right? So we'll connect you into schemes in the US, APAC, Africa, partners in LATAM, so on and so forth. So that's kind of the key point. I think overall with verification, the whole purpose of it is to, again, verify the payee before the money moves, and that's the fundamental point. We don't want to have another kind of fraud data point and retrospectively look at it. It's all about making sure we know the ultimate beneficiary before the money moves, so then you can make a judgment call as a PSP and ultimately stop that fraudulent payment.
Well, it's a really important topic and some great insights there. Thanks for joining us in the studio.
No, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you.